So tonight we are beginning a series. I'm going to be having conversations with people who are crazy enough to go on this Centennial Seppala Expedition with me. And tonight I have my new friend Caleb. Caleb is a videographer, works with NorthFace, works with Red Bull. He's got quite the resume, very impressive, especially for a man as young as you are.
Oh, thank you, Jonathan. It's a privilege to be here.
Yeah. So let's start at the beginning. You're not only Canadian, you're Quebecois, right?
Yeah. Born and raised. So I'm still. So I had like a English upbringing, despite me being surrounded by French. So in a lot of ways, I learned my French in the climbing gym. So when everyone
you learn the swear words first.
Yeah, we got a lot of them in Quebec.
Yeah. They're all religious swears, though, right?
Pretty much.
Yeah.
It's ingrained in the culture.
Yeah.
But if anyone wants to ask how near and dear climbing to my heart, that's where I start.
Okay.
When that's where I got my start. So it depends how far back you want to go. And my dream started pretty young. I'm a dreamer at heart. So it's let's say pretty much at 15 years old, I had some good ideas what I wanted to do.
So were you indoor climbing when you were a kid? Is that when you started indoor climbing?
In the climbing world, we call I guess what I was the comp kids. And I didn't discover it until I think I was 16 when I discovered climbing, which is in the competition world. And I didn't have the perspective at that time to know, but it was quite a bit older than most of the kids start. And so I was in the competition scene. I love the idea of competing, and so I did the tours around the province for a little bit. That was a lot of fun. So I got my introduction to climbing indoors, and that was a really good time. And then I transitioned outdoors. I got to touch real rock one time. We went out with some friends from school, and goodness, that was something that. It stamped something in my soul that still lingers to this day. I don't know what it is about touching rocks.
How old were you when that happened? Like when you went from the indoor climbing to going out into the field and doing it? Like when did that transition take place?
I must have been around. I think I was about 17.
Okay,
17. Yeah. It's hard to pinpoint. I've actually got a reminder on my phone just the other day, because we're approaching some milestones for when I started all this. And as we get to the 10-year mark, there's a lot of reminders I'm starting to get brought up. And climbing was first on that list. I think I remember freezing my fingers off because we went highballing. And when you're climbing, you could have two disciplines. You can climb with a mattress underneath you. It's called bouldering. And typically these are designed. We didn't have a mattress or a rope. We had a bed mat that you could squeeze it together with one hand, and we were basically climbing high enough off the ground where you might even consider roping up, and then if you fall, your two friends below you try to guide you onto this mat that was not designed for anything, barely designed to sleep on. So that was my first introduction. So it was my first introduction to no fall zones, we call them now.
So it was an Eric Larson sleeping pad is what it was.
That's exactly what it was.
Kidding. So you started like competition climbing indoors, and then the outdoor passion kind of grew from that. It kind of came from there.
Yeah. So, when you're driving on the street and any road you would drive on vacation, I would be looking out the windows as all kids do. And instead of playing, the car games or I would be looking at the rocks.
Yeah.
And let's say, imagine if I could go climb that thing. And it's hard to say why we're a little bit twisted. Mm-hmm. And it's a beautiful thing that I really think there's something electrical about touching the rocks. Mm-hmm. And there's so much more you could say about it than that. But at its core, I think that's what got me going is that adventurous spirit to say that's something unique that I haven't seen very many people do. I was a very adventurous kid, though I hadn't quite tapped into it yet. I was very into sports, though I sucked at every traditional sport I touched. I was a sports concentration kid. I would do it all, and I never quite...
I was the president of my chess club.
There you go.
That's what kind of athlete I was.
And that's what probably in my creative endeavors, I probably should have pursued something like that instead. I wanted to do football, and that was the one thing I wasn't allowed to do was football. And thank goodness my mom was wise enough to see that. I would have gotten destroyed. my unathletic self at the time. So when I discovered rock climbing, I found an outlet for my athleticism, and it switched something in my brain.
And it was the same with me with I lived outdoors. So I grew up in Tennessee. The climate's great. So on Saturdays, I'd leave at breakfast, and my mom said, when the sun goes down, be home. And I was just in the woods the whole time. So that's for the nature side of it. But my athleticism, my dad's always like, Jonathan just walks through a room and things fall over. Like, can you be any more clumsy? That kind of thing. So, but then I found martial arts, and martial arts was my sport. It's like the thing that was like, oh, I like being, this being physical thing isn't so bad. There's actually, something, to, engaging this body in a visceral and kind of a way that, kind of pushes me and challenges me. I get that. Most podcasts would just keep moving on from this topic, but because, spirituality is something that's really important to me, I want to circle back to something you said earlier. You said, just connecting with the earth, connecting with these stones, feeling that connection to the earth. You said there's a lot more to it than that. So what do you mean by that? Like, what is it to you? What are you feeling?
So it started with a feeling, and then I discovered some science behind it. And I'm not going to go too deep into science because that's not my area of expertise, and I've heard it explained a lot better. But there is a healing power in nature that we all describe, but there's actually a wonderful science behind it, and it comes in all shapes and forms. But one of the elements to it is if you touch, for example, me, it's touching a rock, but if you walk barefoot in the grass, walk barefoot in the beach, you swim in the ocean, this transition of electrons to the natural earth has a very real and profound effect. It's hard to describe. And once I was a naturalistic doctor that I was listening to said that he prescribes to his patients barefoot walking in the grass for mental health issues. I found that fascinating when I heard that. I said, I wonder if that has any connection with what I feel when it comes to peace when I'm out there in the rock. And there's a lot that goes to it. There's the isolation when the wind's howling you and the elements start to kick in. There's something about the raw feeling of feeling out of your element, yet somehow so in tune with it in a very primal way.
It definitely awakens some primal things. Are there, I know this is maybe pushing this question a little too far, but are there certain types of granite or stones, certain types of mountains, certain types of earth that when you're in connection with, has different effects? Or do you feel like it's just having that connection to the earth in general?
I think it's just in general.
Yeah.
I mean, time will tell. I'm 25. I've yet to touch all the rocks. I really enjoyed limestone, but limestone gave me anxiety because it's so slippery. So it's hard to, I think I'll always have a preference and a soft spot in my heart for granite. That's where I started.
Yeah.
It's sharp. It hurts. You always end up with bloody fingers. We have a local crag at our place called Orford, and it's notorious for its difficulty, and you always come out of there with taped fingers and raw hands, and then somehow you keep wanting to go back.
Because in that primal way you feel alive, right? In a way that you didn't feel, sitting in front of a television, sitting, on a sofa,
100%,
playing video games or whatever, right? It's and I think Eric Larson, I think he said today in his presentation that we went to, the Polar Explorer, for those who don't know who he is, he said, we do hard things so that we can do hard things because we have to do hard things.
And that last part is extreme.
Because we have to do hard things. Yeah. And I know that like when I don't like being cold, but when I'm uncomfortable cold, but I'm out, on a long run with the sled dogs, and the dog, the best time is when you've got a full moon, you shut the headlamp off and you're running with a wolf pack, and there's just so much primal connectivity going on there that is just unreal. It's like, this is a wolf pack that's giving you an opportunity to run with them, you know? And so you feel that connection. And so from a young age, I've felt exactly what you're describing. I felt like my home was the woods, you know, being in the woods in Tennessee. And then in my younger years, it was West Tennessee, but then we moved up into the Appalachian Mountains, and then I was just in heaven. I was like, oh, you know?
I can see why. What made you move out, man?
Yeah, the Marine Corps. The Marine Corps.
That would do.
Yeah, and when I was a kid, I said, you know, whenever I grow up, I'm going to move where there's snow. I remember saying that a lot. And then I went infantry in the Marine Corps and ended up with a cold weather infantry unit. And then when I got out, I settled here in Maine, where I had come for SEER school. SEER is survival, evasion, reconnaissance, escape. We had to do that in winter, and that was my first brush with frostbite and things like that. And But like you just said, you know, I got a brush with frostbite in Maine. So what do I do when I get out of the Marine Corps? I'm going to move to Maine. You know, it's isn't that weird? That's weird, isn't it?
It's the addiction of type 2 fun, eh?
Yeah.
Yeah. Type 2 feelings too. That's an interesting one. I'm going to coin that. If ever I start a podcast myself, this is very fun for me. But yeah, it'll be type 2 feelings. They come and go the same way that the fun does. They're not as fun to go through, but they bring everlasting lessons. Yeah.
So what took you from the climbing and then the outdoor climbing to wanting to chronicle your stories, and then I'm assuming first your stories and then the stories of others?
Yeah.
Because we've only hung out for about a week.
Yeah.
For those who might be listening to this, we had a Expedition 101 get together of all of the expedition members for the upcoming Centennial Seppala Expedition in Alaska. So we've all been together for almost a week now. And one thing that I know about you, just from what time we've spent together, is you understand, appreciate, and cherish the power of story, right?
Absolutely.
And so when did that come into the mix?
Man, that's a good question and a tough one to pinpoint, because there's a difference between the instinct and then the realization to interpret that instinct, right?
Yeah.
So I think I always had a heart for stories, but I think at the time I didn't know how to channel it. So when I refer to time, I mean the young years before I discovered my camera, and even an extent after that, there was a large period of my art that was focused on technicality. Mm-hmm. It's very easy to get distracted in this industry. So when you're lining on a goal, which my goal was to suffer with my camera, I always knew I wanted to do that. Ever since I discovered my camera, I always loved mountains, but I knew that I always had a deep instinct that there was, and I saw it too in the videos I would consume. I grew up watching videos from Jimmy Chin and Renan Osterk, and all the best in the industry really delved deep into story. And what I saw was every single time I would see someone suffering extremely in the environment, I would see a beautiful mindset and beautiful perspective on life come out of that. Mm-hmm. I didn't know how to interpret all of it at the time, but I could see it and I could feel it. And there was, in some way, I could grasp it in the limited knowledge that I had on life. And I really latched on to that. So when I was climbing, I loved adventure. I loved the idea of climbing. I finally discovered a sport I was good at. In many ways, it was selfish because I was embracing that. Mm-hmm. But I went back very quickly to not feeling complete in that experience. And I toyed with that a little bit because I'm like, is this a pattern that I'm going to live my whole life? And at this point, I must have been, 17 in that area. And then when I started picking up my camera, which I had been toying with for quite some time, but bringing it on my adventures, bringing it climbing, and taking a photo and saying, if this moment makes me feel a certain way, maybe I can put that in an image in a way that I'll never grasp what it was to actually be there. But if I can get just close enough, the idea was I could maybe get someone to feel a little bit of what the magic felt like being there. Yeah. And most people, I don't think, get to experience that because it's logistically, there's a lot to it. I think that it's a beautiful thing. And that I latched onto that right away.
That's awesome. And it's mostly your mountain climbing videos that really caught my eye. We were on the hunt for a videographer for this expedition, and I was given a list, and this is a true story. I'm not blowing sunshine. I got a list, and I started from Eric Larson, started doing my homework, checking out websites, Instagram accounts, and all like that. And when I came to yours, you're the only guy I contacted.
Really?
I didn't even call the other guys. You're the only one I called. So I went through everyone's websites, and I just kept getting drawn back to the videos that you had produced, and the images that I saw there. Your tent hanging off the cliff, and that really great, panoramic view coming out of the tent, all that stuff that you were doing. And I was like, yeah, this guy's got an eye. And so I was like, hey, I know Eric Larson, and I'd like to talk to you. And we talked, and everything since then has only just served to reinforce that decision. I think you understand that there's no such thing as just a story.
Yeah.
And I think you really believe that. And I love your work. I think your art's amazing, and that's what it is. It's art. You shared some photos with me last night, and I shared them with some friends of mine, and the immediate response was, this guy's good.
So, man, first and foremost, I have to bring it back to you. Thank you, by the way, for that. And I always like to say that the ability to do what I do comes because I hang around with people so much freaking cooler than I am. And it's so wonderful, because I always like to say I've been so blessed by the friends I've been able to have. In case in point, this opportunity is right up that alley. These dogs are amazing. The story is amazing. Everyone on this team is so passionate. It has brought so much to the project. And at the end of the day, I get to actually film that. Same thing as any of the other projects I've ever done. And what I love is I'm a deeply curious person to the experience that every human goes through. I mean, if I introspect enough to know how complex my life is. And I think everyone would be lying to themselves if they didn't acknowledge it. I say, man, I'm an intricate and detailed person. And yet we're 7 billion people as intricate and detailed as your own, right? So, man, how many stories are there untold? I said, is there a scarcity? Every time I see a good documentary, I used to say, man, there's one more that is off the shelf. How many of those are left? Guess what? 99% of them are left.
An infinite number.
All of them are left.
An infinite number.
We're just tapping, and I think we need good stories now more than ever.
That list you showed me of your creative ideas when you shut all the noise out so that your creative juices could just start flowing again.
Fascinating.
And the same thing happens with the best time to plan your next adventure, one polar explorer said, is before you wrap up the one that you're on. And there's 10 things I want to do after this expedition is done.
We need to learn to focus on one thing.
Yeah.
People with our personality, that's a hard thing to balance, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. Yeah, and that's why I surround myself, right behind you there on the wall is the map of where we're going to be in January and February in the low Arctic of Alaska. And
I still can't wrap my head
around that. I've been
700 miles
eating, breathing, sleeping those villages along the Yukon and those mountain ranges and those waterways and the blowholes on the Bering Sea and where we're going to be crossing Norton Sound and all that stuff. I've been studying that stuff so long that, in preparation of this, I feel like I've been there 4 or 5 times already. And, just kind of pour yourself into it that way. Before we get to talk about that a little bit more, though, I want to ask you, so how did you break into the big adventure film industry? You're on Team Canada's NorthFace team. You've done Red Bull stuff. How did you make that jump into that realm?
Yeah, man, it's where do we even start? There's a journey. I'll try to make it as concise because what it also breaks down to is at every point, and it's easy to see them in retrospect, which now that I have enough of these patterns, I'm going to use it moving forward. But there was a series of lessons that I learned breaking into it. And it was basically trial by fire is what it all breaks down to. I have a personality infused with drive. It's been I used to have this nickname growing up. My parents would call me Kedap Kapab Gingras, which doesn't translate well into English, but it basically means that I've always believed I can do anything I set my mind to.
Nice.
And there was a lot of, I've always had the confidence to believe that I'm capable of it. I've never actually had the how in most cases. And I don't need the how. I crave it. And those are two different things. But I've never needed it.
Yeah.
Because I know that as much as I'm running towards something, I'm running away from something else. And it's not to demonize any type of the traditional ways of doing things. It's not for me. And I'm truly at peace with discomfort and uncertainty in a way that I've never have been before. And that's been a journey. And I just started basically from the start, I guess must have been around 18 years old, trying everything. And in the same spirit of why I resonate with what Eric Larson speaks about, and there's no shortage of problems out there, and you're never going to reach a point where there's no problems to solve. I think the best tactic, and maybe I'm not in a position to say the best tactic, what's been my approach, we'll see how it all pans out, is to try to find problems that I'm good at solving, tackle them with everything I have. And if I can find problems that I'm good at solving, that I also enjoy solving, I think that's the dream. So for me, that started by, I shot cars for free. I would offer, there was this local car company called Get de l'Auto, and I want to see if I was good at shooting that. Didn't like shooting cars much, but it led to interesting opportunities later on, which was a good thing. So I leaned into that. I pivoted. I knew climbing was my thing, so I just started shooting as much of that in my spare time. 2020, I got an opportunity to go shoot a climbing trip, which was my very first at the time in Thailand. It was my first international trip. I bombarded the company who hired me with questions on how to pack for the airport, this and that. I wouldn't, in retrospect, if we had ChatGPT, I would have just asked it. We didn't. So I was in over my head, and that was my first experience of like, this is something.
Were they patient with you when you were drilling them with a gazillion questions?
They were also my friends, and I love to work with my friends, and I like to make friends with everyone. I like to say everyone I haven't met is just a friend I haven't met yet. So one of the beautiful things about that trip is it showed me this is what I want to do. There doesn't need to be money involved. This is just what makes me happy. I love it. It was a wonderful thing. So I got my scuba diving course, and I was in Thailand, did a lot of climbing. My dream has always been all terrain. No good story goes untold, whether in the great deep blue or on the top of the world. I want to bring those stories back home wherever they lead. Yeah. I'm interested in a lot of different things. Mountains are at its core, but in reality, it's the elements. I love harsh elements. I love what those can do. The idea of diving under the ice is interesting to me. So I did some commercial things after that. So I did about 2 years in the commercial space, which is a lot of fun, a lot of lessons, a lot of falling on your face. I learned the art of failure, I think, through commercial work. It pushes you to be better. And I think that was a great compliment to my self-drive. Yeah, definitely. Why do we seek out discomfort? There's an interesting nuance between discomfort and uncertainty. And we hear push your comfort zones, chase your dreams. I'm guilty of using those terms myself, and not that they're wrong, but I think what I would say now moving forward is embrace uncertainty, which comes in a lot of different ways and shapes and forms. But at the core, I noticed at one point I had a contradiction myself, and it was a good kind of contradiction, but I was living something that I wasn't believing mentally, meaning I was living out an adventurous life, meaning I would push uncertainty as a core part of my nature, is in my DNA. Every challenge that would come my way, I would throw myself into it, absolutely with direction and strategy. But like, if it fails, I would say if by way of failure or success, you're going to gain confidence, so why not try? I mean, that's an important point that I learned throughout the journey. But to come back to your previous, why embrace uncertainty or discomfort? Well, you have no other choice in life. That's the nature of life. And for many people who can find themselves in a spot that they're uncomfortable with, do something interesting and crazy, something that shakes a snow globe. I mean, it's the same snow, but it might fall in a different position. You're going to learn a little bit something. You don't know what you don't know, right? And the only way to do that is to go out and pursue something that you're not previously, that you haven't previously tried.
Yeah.
I truly think that that's where the most beautiful growth happens. But you have to get comfortable with those growing pains, don't you?
Yeah. It's funny. I was, and it was mostly toward some young men in our church that some teenage boys that were growing up without fathers, without good positive male role models. But I was, talking about, on the series of family, and I said I want to challenge all the young men here. Find something that scares you a little bit and master it. Something that's going to push you, something that scares you a little bit, something that's going to take you outside of your comfort zone. And then, I said, it can be survival skills, a couple of them were 14, 15 years old.
Yeah.
You've got a mountain ridge behind your house, just tell your mom, I'm going to go practice survival skills tonight. That's where I'm going to be. And I'm here, I'm here for you, but you got to do this. You got to do this. I had a father figure. My dad's 6'3", and probably, he was like 260, 270, really big burly guy.
Yeah.
And, very alpha, very go kind of guy. But even having that influence, I was, and there's nothing wrong with what I'm about to say, but when I was 17, I was, writing poetry, playing the piano, hadn't pushed myself, to the edge of anything. And I was like, I'm going to go into the military, and I have a rich heritage of military service in my family, but I was the first Marine, and now I've got, 2 sons and another one going in, we've become a Marine Corps family. But, I was like, I need to push myself. There was just something inside me that said, it's good to be sensitive. It's good to be artistic. It's good to be creative. It's good to have that soft, sensitive, intimate side of you. There's nothing wrong with that. But, that's part of, the manliness. The other part of it, I needed to have. And, so I chose the toughest branch and went for it. And I put together a team to fast forward now. I put together a team to go work on Leonard Seppala's house in Nome this past summer. And, 3 of the guys were Boy Scouts. And this comes back to your saying, I believe I can do anything, not really sure how. And so 3 of these guys were Eagle Scouts. They were in their 20s now, but they had all 3 of them been Eagle Scouts. And then you had me, an infantryman in the Marine Corps, and my son, infantryman in the Marine Corps. And one of them says, "Oh, look at this! There's 3 Eagle Scouts here. We've got the Marines outnumbered." And my son and I both, without thinking or looking at each other, at the exact same time said, "No, you don't. We're Marines." And it's like, that was our mentality. But I said all that just to say this, like, what I did realize there, and it's something I'm having to work on, and even hanging out with Eric, the polar explorer Eric Larson this week, it's something I need to work on. The Marine Corps mentality is with minimal equipment, with minimal supplies, with minimal, I'm going to persevere and I'm going to push through. And oftentimes the Marine Corps gets the Army's leftovers. And, when I was in the 90s, we were still using Vietnam era equipment while, other branches had all the new equipment. And so we prided ourselves on doing more with less. Right. But the 3 Eagle Scouts that were with us in Nome, their mentality was completely different. Come prepared for everything, have everything, think of every eventuality, and make sure that you got everything to cover it, excess of food, every tool that you're possibly going to need. And so there's two different mindsets. One is I'm just going to go with the bare minimum and tough it out. And that's my mindset. And then the other mindset is, and it can be too far in that extreme too, with a rookie bulge, where there's just, they throw it in the kitchen sink. So what I'm trying to do is, especially if I'm going to be, guiding people in the future in wilderness environments, like I've got to break myself out of that minimalist mentality because, you can do this stuff in comfort, and so the how of that is like, there's different philosophies, right?
That's interesting. And the Marine Corps has such a strong reputation. I would ask you, do you think it was beneficial to have access to less support in some ways? Do you think that gave an opportunity to build that resiliency that they're known for today? Yeah,
no, it's definitely a big part of what we do. It's like, here's a K-bar, go, go build a cabin, with your knife, it's just like, and it's ridiculous sometimes. I mean, it's just flat ridiculous, your DI catches you swatting a mosquito, but that was your drill instructor's mosquito. So now you have to dig, a 4 foot by 4 foot by 4 foot deep grave for the mosquito that you just killed because, and it's just ridiculous stuff. But the whole mentality is, I can do anything with nothing. I can do whatever I'm asked to do, whatever I'm tasked to do. I can do it if I have nothing, and, so when you come at life that way, it's a really can do mentality, but it also can lead to unnecessary suffering. And, we're going up there and I'm thinking, I can just eat once a day, going to keep my budget down, just going to eat once a day, at the end of the day, and I'm going to be fine. And then I got all these 20-year-old guys around me that have these ravenous appetites that if they're not eating 4 times a day, they're ready to mutiny on me. You know what I mean? And it's like, so I have to adapt my mindset, but, so the hows can be different, I think.
And it's an interesting point you bring up, like how much of any adventure is unnecessary suffering. I mean, I realize that I have certain people in my life, thank God, that I can vent to, because I'm a pretty, I give a lot of myself to my work, and I try to give as much of myself to my friends as possible. And to do that, I have support systems around me that are wonderful. I couldn't imagine my life without them. And one of the things that comes up, I'm like, man, I got a lot of problems to tackle right now. And they're all, and I can look back on conversations years ago and there's always something to tackle that always feels overwhelming at the time. And at some point I realized that these are all, things that I brought on myself. These are challenges that I brought on. These are adventures and uncertain outcomes that I've invested myself into that wouldn't have come by had I not tried to make it so. And so at some point you say there's something deeply interesting about the philosophy of the human existence that somehow one could say it manufactures problems when there are none, because that's what keeps life interesting. And I mean, it's interesting. You can go deep into that one, and I've had some interesting conversations, but that is a curiosity to me. There's always something.
You work so hard, and that cliche saying, hard times make strong men make easy times easy times.
So right on.
Yeah, it is right on. And you think about Henry David Thoreau, for example, at Walden Pond. He grew up with a silver spoon in his mouth. He grew up in wealth. And so here you have a couple generations working really hard to make their children as comfortable as possible. And then once the kids get as comfortable as possible, they reject it and say, no, I want primal. No, I want hard. And so he unplugs himself from civilization and lives on a cabin, in the woods and then goes exploring the North Maine woods. And so it is the cyclic thing where, we work so hard to make it easy for the next generation when there's something in the human spirit that says, I don't want easy.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And that's one of the beautiful things about the adventure that we're going on and the will to make a documentary about this that will, among a lot of other areas to explore, is definitely going to tap. And by very least, it'll communicate it without us having to say anything. But this is what the beauty of embracing adventure, a challenge, can do. Yeah. And we need that. That's at the core of who we are. Yeah. It's not going anywhere. And man, I can tell you, we're going to we're going to have a new appreciation for our houses. Mm-hmm. This is something I would delve deep into a conversation with Eric Larson about, because there's few people on this planet who have experienced what he's experienced. Yeah. And then you come back and it brings a whole new perspective to your life.
He's got stories that he doesn't even tell. Like the first night we had dinner with him, I don't know if you know this, he spent 9 days floating on a kilometer piece of ice in the Arctic Sea, skiing around the edges of this piece of ice for 9 days to stay warm until someone could rescue. And he said, and I was crying because I thought I'm never going to get off this piece of ice. And it's like, I've never heard that story before. That's freaking awesome.
We're gonna have to work with Eric a little bit. I got some ideas. We're gonna, at very least, you got to get him on your podcast.
Oh yeah. Well, he was going to be on the podcast while he was here this weekend, but I really thought that it'd be really great to just get everybody on one at a time and just spend the time like we're spending right now. So for our listeners, I'm just going to do like the radio pitch right here of our expedition. Then I'm going to ask you some questions about it. For our listeners who may not know, January 27th of this winter of 2025 is going to be the 100-year anniversary of the story that, Disney keeps cashing in on and other people cash in on. It's the story of Togo and Balto and Leonard Seppala and a lot of Athabascan mushers saving the children of Nome from an outbreak of diphtheria. The only way to get the antitoxin in was by dog sled team. And as I'm saying all this, I'm looking at the map at the route that they took 100 years ago. And it was a relay of 20 teams. And we're going to be taking our teams from the beginning to the end to commemorate that on the actual anniversary. And you've come aboard not only to chronicle the story, but to be on this adventure with us. So what are your thoughts about this? Like, as you've been because you're the newest member of the team. So you've only had like a couple weeks to really digest all of this. Yeah. So, where are you at? What are your thoughts? Like, where are you at on all this?
Man, it's the privilege of my life to do a project. And in many ways, even though I've had 2 weeks to digest this, I've been thinking about it since I was 15. Yeah. So in me, it's a dream come true. I always knew from a very young age, this is the kind of project I want to shoot. It's everything I want. And now that it's here, I'm vividly aware of that it's here. And that's where the 2 weeks coming up. And I'm looking at that launch date coming up soon. And I'm seeing there's a lot of questions around my mind of what goes into filming something at minus 50. What are the logistics that are going to be involved in that? And we're out there for 18 days. And the more I'm learning about this project, I'm like,
Eric is trying to convince me that we can sleep comfortably at 50 below. I still don't know that I believe it, but
everyone listening, stay tuned. Yeah. Now, one must know the very first thing we learned from Eric is if you die, you gotta die in a pencil shape so you're easy to drag out.
That's it.
But Mom, I'm sorry.
I'm going to do just the opposite, though. I'm going to tie myself up in a pretzel if I'm freezing, so they have a hard time getting me out of there.
Man, it's going to be a wonderful adventure, and I'm just. Yeah, the time is coming, but we got so much done so far. We went out on the dogs the other day, and I realized that as I was with my camera, and this is the first time I've been around these sled dogs, and there's an amazing story around what we're trying to accomplish there as well. And, but I got lost in their eyes, and I noticed that while you guys are all prepping, you know, my job as a storyteller is to get all the angles, and I'm here and I'm photographing the eyes. I'm like, and it's amazing. I went up to every single one of them. I got a shot of their eyes. And they would come up and lick me. Some of them were still afraid of the camera. We're good. We're getting used to it. But man, what a wonderful and beautiful experience that was. And I'm looking at these photos and I'm like, man, not like just this is enough to capture people's attention. The story of these huskies. What do you want to share about that?
Well, I mean, that's something that I've committed the last 25 years of my life to, for better or worse. Some people, you know, would say, you know, that I've made a lot of sacrifices to come down this road that, you know, other things have suffered sometimes at the expense of this. But really, it's destiny. And I really legitimately mean that. And this is why I say that. After Seppala saves the children of Nome, he moves here to Maine. I didn't know that when I moved to Maine. When I moved to Maine, I was like, I'm going to become a musher. There's snow. I like dogs, snow dogs. I'd never met a musher, never seen a dog sled team. I went to the library. We didn't have the internet. We had the internet, but it was, you know. So I went to the library and had to enter library loan books to get books to read on dog sledding, read up on it. School of Hard Knocks, just taught myself, just dove right in. And this is in my early 20s. I was, you know, a little bit younger than you, 22, 23 when I dove in. And then I found out that these Siberian Huskies that I've been adopting from people's couches to build my dog sled team, that they weren't capable of doing what the dogs 100 years ago did. That they had been bred for the last 100 years for looks. They had been bred for the last 100 years to be pets. And so they had lost the function, you know, in this desire for this cosmetic form, they'd lost their function.
Right.
And so as I did the research, I was like, okay, well, this Leonard Seppala guy had the real deal and he brought him here to Maine. Oh, that's really cool. And then he sold them to, I'm going to get these wrong here. Harry Wheeler in Quebec, when they closed up the kennel 10 years later. So then they went to Quebec, and then, from Harry Wheeler, it went to McFall. From McFall, it went to Jeffrey Bragg. Oh, Jeffrey Bragg's still alive. Oh, he just moved from Whitehorse, Yukon to Manitoba. I'm going to drive to Manitoba and I'm going to meet this guy and I'm going to get some of these dogs. And so I started shifting into the Seppala Siberian sled dog. There's only 5 breeders of these dogs left on the planet. And if I had to guess, I'd say there's about 100 to 130 of them right now. And 22 of them are in my dog yard. And so, and then 4 years ago, I became the president of the breed club. So, you know, it's just like, it just seemed to me like this is what I was supposed to be doing. Like, this is my time. This is my story. This is, you know, my little wrinkle in the history book, you know. And so I just threw myself into it. Yeah.
And it's led us here.
Yeah.
Man, and I'm sure Eric would find a way to say, in many respects, not to put words in his mouth, but would bring him on a similar path. It all starts with pursuing something that you have a calling to, and it may never be optimized. It may end up being optimized. It would, in almost every way, require sacrifice. I have yet to hear a story worth listening to, and not to downgrade anyone's story, but anything that captures my attention these days has something uncertain to it. It all boiled down to a choice that went something along the lines of, in some way, shape, or form, I'm going to do this thing when everyone else says to do another thing, because something deeply inexplicable in my DNA asks it of me. And you have to trust that you see something at an angle that no one else does, which is an interesting thing about mentorship with someone like my age. I like to absorb everything like a sponge, but sometimes it's difficult to find the nuance in what you absorb and what you don't, because everyone sees things from a very unique lens that's based on their perspective on life.
And you don't want to absorb their jaded aspects. You just want to absorb the,
And so what can you do, right? You have to balance the humility to know that you don't know it all with the confidence that you have a perspective that someone else doesn't.
Yeah.
I think it all boils down to, you can afford to make a lot of mistakes in your 20s. It's easy for me to say that in my 20s. There's a lot of people going through a different story and a different life.
Yeah.
But whoever can have the options to optimize themselves in a way that, I'll give some concrete examples. I don't drink. I don't do the traditional partying.
Right.
And in many ways, I've never felt like it cost me something, but when I go to a party, I feel very awkward. You ask anyone around, I'm not the guy who can dance or vibe like everyone else. But on the flip side, I feel that if I continue on this path, I'm gonna be able to reach. I'm willing to sacrifice that in my 20s, and ultimately it's not a sacrifice. Everyone sees it as a sacrifice because it looks wildly uncomfortable, and you only see the best of it on social media. Most people always do, but on the back end, no one ever sees, like your example with the dogs. No one sees what it takes to build it.
Oh yeah.
And the time, when I'm living in my vehicle on the road, and I'm literally living so much that out of the blue, I'm talking to my dad and I just start bawling. Like, where did that come from?
Yeah.
I can't remember the last time I cried. And it's a manifestation of all the uncertainty that is building in you, that needs an outlet. And at some point you just have to be okay and deeply comfortable with that. I'm like, I find it wonderful. I'm starting to get to that point where I'm like, this not knowing where tomorrow is, where the next check comes from. Ultimately, it's not for me to know, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah,
it's for me to try.
Yeah,
and try and be willing to fail at it, and either way it goes.
Yeah,
I'm pursuing a better version of myself
for sure, absolutely. And so what about this story? What about this adventure? What about this expedition are you the most excited about? Like what is just setting you on fire right now as you think about this?
So all my lights are going off right now when it comes to this expedition, the Seppala Centennial, historic serum run.
Yeah.
So I grew up watching. I remember the Balto film fondly because it had a very big tie to adventure. But also when Togo came out, and I got the deeper story, and I'm like, oh, that's really interesting. I didn't know that. I thought it was wonderful that they made that. Yeah. The production quality in it too. I rewatched it recently. And I'm like, oh, is that what we're doing? And I'm like, okay, of course it's sensationalized, but at some point,
so here's the thing. Here's the thing. They did a pretty dang good job because
don't tell me that. No, man. That's scary.
No, it is scary, and that's why. Like I know Eric has done some crazy stuff, and he's been some crazy places.
Yeah.
But not only have I read the chronicles from back then, I know guys who run this route in the similar route. They run the last 250 miles of it in the 1,000-mile Iditarod every year. And I get stories every year from friends about how grueling that, I'm not worried about, the Yukon River has its problems, and I'm not worried about falling through the sea ice. I'm, worried about the blistering winds coming off of the ocean and hammering. I had a friend, Special Forces in South Africa, had decided he wanted to run the Iditarod, went to Alaska, hammering it out. Very competent.
Yeah.
Out of the 1,000-mile Iditarod, he gets 40 miles from the finish line. The blowholes there on the coast turned everything to polished glass on the mountains. And so the dog sled is sliding all over the place. The dogs are sliding all over the place. He breaks his leg. He sprains his wrist. And he's still determined, I'm 40 miles from the finish line. I'm going to finish this. I've gone 960 miles, right? Yeah. But then the blizzard gets so bad that he says, Jonathan, he said, if I hadn't have hit the button and gotten evacuated, I would have had dead dogs. And so he said, I had to, and this guy's a BA guy. Like he would have walked with a broken leg to the finish line. Yeah. I know him, and he did the next year. But, so I'm like, I've heard some stories, and those stories, those Iditarod stories, that's in March. Mm. And we're going to be doing this in February.
Yeah, at a worst time of year.
Yeah, when there's a lot less daylight, a lot colder temperatures. So
it wouldn't be an adventure without it, eh? Man, we don't know, man. We don't know. Mom, ignore everything you just heard. Yeah, see, we're going to be fine.
Yes,
but
fine.
Man, at the end of the day, this is pretty real, and of course, it's all a matter of perspective. And we can hope for the best, plan for the worst is always the philosophy, right? There's a lot of first in here for me
and me
as a camera operator, and everyone involved. We're grateful to have Eric.
For sure.
But even the question of batteries in my mind going around minus 50 is going to be an interesting challenge. So right now I'm working with our mechanics, and these guys are brilliant, right? And they're starting to put together these ideas and say, we can do this, we can do that, we can develop some heating systems. So to give everyone a little bit of a clear picture, I won't go on a tangent, but the plan here is to have 2 dog mushing teams that are going to be pushing the actual objective. And then we'll also have the, 3 sleds on this?
It will be 3, yeah. And there'll be, in addition to hauling supplies, they're going to hopefully be assisting you with getting some good shots for us.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So me, I kind of have this idea. I'm going to set up everything on my Ski-Doo and have it, ideally my system's all dialed. And if everything goes to plan, which we all know it never does, we should have a good workflow, I think, with the system we have set up. Yeah. I don't anticipate any big red flags. I think it'll come down to the details in the systems and managing the cold, which is a big factor. And I mean, me as a climber, there's a lot of gear questions involved around what's the difference between the lightweight version of everything I own versus the heavy-handed nature of what we're going to be doing. There's a conflict there, and in many ways it's going to be a challenge just in getting the layering systems right. And I love Eric's approach on be selfish in many ways and take care of yourself and don't let a problem become a bigger problem.
Absolutely. And that's the thing that I took away from his training this weekend with, the cold weather survival was basically, because we get 40 below here, but it's a day or two. And I'll be honest, like when we hit 40 below, I'm like, I'll put off training for another day or two until the temperatures warm up, so, to be out in it day after day after day is a different thing. But my big takeaway was, you stop, you deal with it, you take care of it now, before it becomes a bigger problem. And, I have to change my mindset, because my mindset is power through. And I've got to adjust that to say, no, my fingers are cold right now, and I need to deal with the fact that my fingers are cold right now.
And that's a really important thing that you just brought up. And it's something we're all going to need to be mindful of. I think, like, I'm going to be so attentive to what I learned from this point on. Yeah. And I'm going to ask a lot of questions, because there is a big part of my DNA that is a push forward mentality.
Yeah.
And if you have a problem, you deal with it at the end of the day.
Yeah, suck it up until you get to your destination, and then deal with it. Yeah.
As an example, I broke my ankle earlier this summer.
Yeah.
And I realized even during our training run, in a hectic situation with the dogs, I grabbed the leash and I went running to help, and I took a misstep and I re-rolled it in a way that I wouldn't. I usually, at this point in the ankle fracture, I'm very attentive to where I place my steps. And that's something I realized cannot happen when you're on an expedition. Yeah. You cannot afford to be so in the moment that you forget to take care of yourself first and foremost and understand where your limits and weaknesses are. And in that very specific case, my entire focus was making sure that I could be a good team member in that moment. And in a big part, because of my age, I said, I'm gonna be in a position here where I'm gonna help the team. It's a team building exercise.
Yeah.
And I realized that what ultimately is going to help the team is me being in my best shape possible for as long as possible.
For sure.
And those are 2 parts of the same coin.
Everyone, 2-legged and 4-legged, needs to get to the finish of this together.
So there's going to be some questions for people from probably my audience from this who have no idea. Can we add just a moment of context?
Yeah.
So for the dogs, I'm curious, these dogs are going to be okay at -50?
Yeah. So here's and we're going to be doing some filming on that for one of our sponsors. When people ask me that question, are your dogs cold? I say, is a polar bear cold? Is an Arctic wolf cold? Is an Arctic fox? Is a muskox cold? Perhaps at times, but in general, they're built for it, right? And so these true, and this is the difference between what we're running in this expedition and what you generally see in races. In races, you see hybrid dogs that have been bred for speed. Those coats are really needed. Those full leg booties that they're putting on that come all the way up are really needed because everything that they've gained in speed, they've lost in winter hardiness. And, but the breed of dog that we're taking on this trip has for 9,000 years been bred to work, function, and be comfortable in the Arctic. That's their home. And you're talking about their beautiful blue eyes. This is just an example. The reason why they have blue eyes are horrible, as you know, when it's really bright outside, because, it's just, you're getting so much light. The reason is there's so much darkness in the Arctic during the winter, and these dogs need to be able to see. So with those blue eyes, they're able to process more of the light that's reflecting off the snow at night from the moon and the stars and everything like that. So it helps them to be able to see better in low light conditions. So everything about them, here's some more biology. The blood that's flowing down to their feet, unlike any other types of dogs from around the world, they have a double exchange system of heat. So, the warm blood is what's coming from the heart, right? And then the cold blood's coming back. That's how it is in most mammals. But with them, there's an exchange all along the way so that even the cold blood coming back from the feet is being infused with warm blood as it's coming back.
Wow.
So like everything about them is built for this. And they thrive in it. What you find is the colder it gets, just the more insane they get, man. They're just like, yes. And so I tell people here in Maine, even in northern Maine, there's nothing the winters here can throw at them that would make them in any way uncomfortable. For us, the big concern, and I tell people, they're like, oh, you let your dog sleep outside. And I'm like, yeah, they'd be miserable if I didn't. My big concern is people who live in South Texas and Alabama and Florida that have Malamutes and Siberian Huskies. Those are the ones that you really should be worried about. But, so, you just keep them cool. You keep them shaded during the summer. And, but yeah, this is what they were built for. This is what they live for. And you've seen it. You can't push a rope is a saying that I like to hold on to. You really can't. You can't force a dog team to move forward if it doesn't want to move forward. And you saw it when you pull out those harnesses. Yeah. They go insane because this is, and I grew up in the South where everyone had horses. Yeah. Everyone rode horses, and I love horses. I would love to have another one someday, but horses tolerate being ridden for the most part. And I hear there are some exceptions, but in my experience, horses are like, okay, put it on, whatever, okay, if I have to, kind of thing. Yeah. These dogs, you saw it. They live for this. This is like, it is their, and I'll say this and then I'll shut up. You asked me a question you shouldn't have, because now I'm like,
save some for the documentary.
Yeah. So here's the cool thing is, we have, I say we, the Inuit people from the high Arctic, have for the last 9,000 years bred these dogs. What they've done is, wittingly or unwittingly, they have selective bred a particular part of the wolf's social life, and that is we're a pack, and we're running down a prey. We're a pack on the trail hunting something down. And so they have selectively bred that and magnified it and magnified it and magnified it to where these dogs just want to get together and go down that trail. And somewhere deep in their DNA, they think there's some, they're hunting something. Somewhere in their DNA, they're a wolf pack hunting something down, and they're letting you be a part of that.
Did they ever win?
And yeah. That, there's man, poor unwitting animals coming across the trail when we're out on the trail. And here's what's great: they'll get a whiff of a moose that has passed through the trail earlier, and you'll feel it. Like you'll just be cruising along, and there'll be a little flutter of a grouse or something in the woods, and all of a sudden the sled just takes off. You've got good leaders, so they keep them on the trail, they keep them going, but your team kind of bends toward the woods because the undisciplined dogs want to turn it into an actual hunt,
Dude, speaking of hunting, so Jamie, one of his first questions, so Jamie's our mechanic, he mentioned, can you shoot? I'm like, is that something that we want to talk about?
Yeah, so it would be nice, if obviously back then, if they could hunt as they went. We can't legally do that because there's hunting seasons and all that. But there are dangers, and in those dangers, you have to. Here in northern Maine, my son, who is in the Marine Corps now. He was training for the Iditarod his junior year of Iditarod for the Can-Am Crown his junior year of high school, and we had a moose that just refused to yield the trail and kept charging and stomping the dogs, and he would back off and then charge and stomp the dogs. And I felt sorry for the moose. It was one of those really deep snow years where you have a thick crust of snow of ice on the snow, and to the moose it was thinking, here's a wolf pack. And if I leave this hard packed trail and go into that deep snow, that wolf pack's going to have the advantage, and I'm done. So I'm going to stand my ground. I'm not going to leave it. I knew what the psyche of what was going on, and it was really sad because that moose thought this is a wolf pack, and if I go off the trail into that deep snow, I'm done. So I'm going to charge, and I'm going to try and kill some wolves. And so it was a 45-minute standoff. I was trailing him on a snowmobile while he was training. What I did was I pulled him off of the dog team. I grabbed the dog team because I'm bigger and, weigh a lot. So I can hold the dogs back a little better. And I had him get on the snowmobile to go get a gun. And I was honestly hoping that by the time he came back with a rifle, we wouldn't have to use it. Yeah. But it was still stomping 45 minutes later.
And it would have ended up killing some dogs.
Yeah.
Man.
So
nature.
So we will have to do that. If the situation arises, and then those situations, the custom in Alaska is you field dress it so the meat doesn't go bad. Mm-hmm. And then when you come into the next village, you let the locals know where it is so that, it can be harvested and respectfully used,
Right. So the animal is used.
Yeah. So you're going to field dress it. You're going to take all of its entrails out and everything so that it doesn't go bad. Yeah. And then, throw some snow inside of it to cool off the meat so the meat doesn't go bad. And then right when you pull into the next village, say, hey, so many miles back, there's a moose, enjoy, and the local villagers, and usually what they do is then they'll dice it up and then they'll give it as gifts to the elders in the community.
There we go.
Yeah. So it's good stuff. Yeah.
Okay. That's good to know.
Yeah.
Plan for the worst, but hope for the best. That all boils down to,
Yeah. So how can, first, before I ask you how people can follow you, I want to ask long term.
Yeah.
Like, let's say you're 35.
Yeah.
Where do you want to be when you're 35? Like, where do you see your career, your life? Like, what are your goals from here?
Man, I like to say I knew at 15 what I wanted to be at 35, but it's very big picture. How much can any of us, like we say, we plan, but it's not us who chooses our path, right? So what I'm trying to accomplish in my work is becoming less and less selfish, and not to say there's anything wrong with the ambition that can manifest itself sometimes as very, internal. I want to do this. I want to do that. And So when I started, I would, with all the challenges, everything that wouldn't necessarily help me, I thought would come and play like a hindrance. For example, injuries. I wouldn't deal with them in a very healthy way.
Yeah.
So pretty much the last 4 years, I've been injured in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah. And
it breeds the question, why? When all I want to do is shoot expeditions, everything I want hinges on my body being able to keep up. So there was a big part of my brain that didn't feel okay in my own skin because I was chasing a version of myself that I didn't feel like I lived up to.
Yeah.
So what I realize now, so basically now I live in a van. I have an apartment.
You have an apartment, but you don't know why you have one, right?
So when I give myself that space, and it wasn't me actually, I didn't give myself the space. I was forced into space when I broke my ankle. I was forced to stop for the first time in my life. Basically, I was like, whoa, I got to sit on my butt and think about things. Yeah. And I canceled all my contracts. And that actually took some doing because of my push forward mentality. I was going on boats and islands and stuff and going up hills and I was working, and I'm like, someone like, stop, dude. Yep. I wouldn't allow myself to do it. So that took some heavy hitting to get me to staple my pants to the floor and say, let's relax a little bit. So I just spent a lot of time woodworking and finishing my van. Nice. And the nature of who I am.
Which looks really great inside.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I'm very proud of it. I love to tinker. I like to think it's an outlet for me in creativity that doesn't involve a camera. So I love it. So I was having a lot of fun working on that. And my dad would help me so much. And we'd tinker. Say, what do we do with the fridge here? The wiring's not working. We fix that. So it was just a lot of fun. Yeah. But that gave me the space. And then when I hit the road, I just lived in my van for most of the summer. And I traveled around everywhere. And even though I was pushing myself a lot to network, with someone who tends to be as busy as I am, I did give myself space. And to me, that it doesn't sound like I didn't give myself 2 weeks. I would give myself 2 to 3 days of like nothing to do sometimes before I got going again. But that was enough for me at the time because it was still new, something I'm not used to. So I would just relax and I would force myself not to think about work. I wouldn't touch screens. I would get off social media completely, no computer or anything. And it would just be me in the desert in complete silence. And I would think, it would be wonderful. And I started to put together some of the big pieces. And one of the things I realized and I started to realize them earlier than this, but they really became concrete to me. And in many ways, they still are a little loose. And I think they'll still take some finagling in order to understand. But it was the question of, why am I an artist? Mm-hmm. Why do I want to tell stories? Yeah. Where do I want to be at 35? Back to the original question is, well, the version of myself maybe 2 years would have said I want to be an expedition filmmaker and I want to shoot for National Geographic. And not that those things are bad, but it's an I situation. Mm-hmm. And what I realize is that there's a couple pillars that are now foundational to me and the work I want to put out there in life that were only a result of the things that I considered to be hindrances. And it completely shifted my perspective. I'm like, wow, some of the things I'm going to cherish most probably moving forward are the things that I resented the most, which were my injuries, which have now solidified my need for movement more than anything else. Mm-hmm. I always just say I would go out on a run. I love climbing, but I would go out on a run because I had to, because I had to be an adventure photographer that could keep up with the athletes. Yeah. I need to run now. And I still can't. Mm-hmm. I still can't. Mm-hmm. And I want to, and I'm just like, I'm craving it now more than everything. I'm looking at all these big things. I gotta go.
I understand.
And I know from your story as well. And so that was a gift. I'm like, oh,
running was my drug of choice. Yeah. Before I ripped my knee out, it was my drug of choice. I mean, like that was my, that was my fix. I mean, and it has been ever since the Marine Corps. And, so I get that completely.
It's an unwind, isn't it?
Oh man. Yeah.
But what a beautiful realization to realize that 4 years of injury and everything that did to my mental health and what it did to not what it did, but how I processed it. Yeah. Was so unhealthy because I would be so hard on myself. Yeah. And it would so hard on myself. And it led to a lot of mental health issues that I'm still in some ways recovering from. Yeah. But what those mental health issues.
And dealing with those alone too.
And dealing with those alone in
living
many ways.
Alone on the road, You know, I mean, you have a family support network, but you're separated from them. You're traveling and so you're dealing with all of this by yourself.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I didn't know how to deal with it. Yeah. It wasn't that I wasn't trying.
Yeah.
So I'm notorious for talking my dad's ear off, and he's an amazing listener. But what I realized is that what I was doing was trying to find an anchor in those conversations and trying to contextualize what I was living, the uncertainty I was living in such a way where maybe I could put the right amalgamation of words together where someone, in this case, my dad, would understand maybe in some way what I was going through and validate it in some way. So I was choosing wrong anchors. One of the other anchors was the number in my bank account. I would look at that and I would be so stingy and tight with my money because whenever you're an artist, you're leaving a piece of your soul with every project. Yeah. And when you're so uncertain and sometimes in this creative space, it's a little harsh. And when you're learning, you're going to make a lot of mistakes. You're going to make a lot of bad art. And that also intertwines with your soul because there's no separation. So then you anchor yourself to these conversations, these arbitrary things like a number in your bank account to validate that you're a good artist and say, if that number's high enough, you must be a good artist because something's working. But all that to say is it boils down to the challenges with mental health created a lot of empathy in me. Yeah. Empathy that I now see is not everywhere. Yeah. And I think that's a sad thing. But it's something I can also work to change now. Yeah. Because I'm aware of it. So that was another pillar of foundation. There's 3 of them. So there was that first one, my need for movement. The second one, which is the empathy. I want to be a part of my life. I want to be I wanted to be a part of as many lives as possible. So we were talking about how we don't, we make plans, but God orders our steps, right? Yeah. And that's, you alluded to that just a while ago, and I knew where you're getting that allusion from. So there's a part of my story that you don't know. Yeah. And so this is the second time you've shared with me what you just shared with me. Mm-hmm. And I haven't had the opportunity, and I can't believe I'm going to do it right here on the podcast, but I haven't had the opportunity to reciprocate and let you know, not only that I understand where you're coming from, but it is also very likely why Providence has put us into this situation together. After 14 years of marriage and having a house full of kids bouncing on my bed at night and all this kind of stuff, I got what was the best job of my life. I became a Maine State Forest Ranger in the North Maine woods as I was going through a divorce. Long story, but Arden, we had lost a son. I'd been laid off from my job. Just the house went into foreclosure, divorce. It was my Job year, right? Like everything that could go wrong was going wrong. And, my best friend, drowned in this lake right across the street. The next day when we pulled his body out of the lake, I'm praying over him, asking God to bring him back from the dead, like I did with Arden. And so, like everything was shaken. My faith was shaken. Everything was shaken. And then I had this job where I was like 6 days on, 3 days off in the North Maine woods alone by myself with just my thoughts. So, and so every time you're telling me this stuff, I'm like, I've been there, man. I've been there. Wow. And, no cell phone coverage. So every night I would drive to this ridge where sometimes I could get cell phone coverage there and just hope that I had a message there that was going to give me a little bit of hope, another text message or a phone call that was going to give me a little hope to get me through to the next day or whatever. And, make a phone call to my dad, same thing, couldn't get a hold of anyone. There's no returned phone calls, no messages. And there was one night that was the night that, I was there. If I had, and I had left it in my cabin, if I had my firearm with me, I would not be sitting here right now. I was that far gone. Wow. And, but that night was the night, where I was like, okay, I've got to start moving in a different direction here. I've got to start changing things here, or
I'm going to self-destruct. I'm going to self-destruct if I don't fix this.
Yeah.
So, or allow God to fix this.
Yeah.
So I've been there. I understand where you're at, and I know that the only thing worse than dealing with trials is having to deal with them alone. And we are social beings. God created us to be social beings, and family, and which, as a side note, is why we get along with wolves and dogs so much, because
Interesting.
They are daylight hunters that hunt in families. Humans are daylight hunters that hunt in families, and so we just kind of blended into each other really well.
I didn't know that. That's a wonderful perspective. I love that.
Yeah. So, but yeah, and sometimes in our life, like you are, you have the lone wolf. Sometimes there are times in life when we're out on our own, blazing a trail and finding our new territory or finding our turf. But you've got to at some point, you've got to have that human connection.
We need it.
Yeah.
We need it now more than ever. And I can't state, and everyone agrees, and then no one does anything about it practically. And I'll give some examples of what we can do practically, because there are things you can do, but everyone says just, we're social creatures. We need to talk. I'll reach out to my friend, and then you go and you don't.
Yeah.
Man, go reach out.
Yeah.
And also, just if there's one thing you take away from that, we don't have to go. There's so much you can talk about. Make yourself available.
Yeah.
And what that means practically is when you're in a car ride and you might be afraid of having a conversation because you can't be bothered, you can ask a strategic question and you shut up.
Mm-hmm.
Ask a very strategic question and you shut up for a minute.
Yeah.
And you let them process for a minute. If they see that space, and they may have never had that opportunity.
Yeah.
It's so weird how many times have you given someone a minute of your time in silence to open up?
Yeah.
We shut those doors so quickly.
Yeah.
And some people, they really, really need that. You could save a life and never realize it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And at different points in our life, I'm thinking right now about a young man in high school that everyone picked on, was very awkward, had no social skills, and how I was, able to help him. A year later, he told me that the day I talked to him on the football field was the day that he was going to commit suicide, and just me taking the time to talk to him. And so that was the day that, I was there for him. But then there were times when I was him. Well, I was him, later on in my life, I was in his situation, and so you never know. And it's just like, man, take the time to make the phone call, take the time to listen. Yeah.
And be real. I want to see a comeback on social media with authenticity. And man, I've seen and reflected on the way I've displayed myself on social media. And it comes down, sometimes we get involved so much with the branding, and it doesn't mean you have to put everything out there.
Yeah.
But I'm vividly aware of the choices I've made in my branding that will always say something along the lines of, my life is awesome, my career is thriving, hire me.
Yeah.
And in reality, sometimes I cry in my van.
Yeah.
And it's really freaking hard.
Yeah. And
absolutely. I've dealt with things, and it's not nearly as much as what many people are dealing with. And the statistics from the WHO say that 1 in 5 people in some way, shape, or form, indirectly or indirectly, are affected by mental health. And that's not a hard statistic to believe these days.
Yeah, no,
not we should do something about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it starts with what we're doing right now, by being open and honest about our personal struggles. And you were talking about what we portray, the persona that we put out there. And, I'm guilty of it too. I just did it. Like, I just did it a while ago when I was telling you about my Job year. Yeah. Some of that I brought on myself, and, I wasn't a perfect person, and I didn't deal with everything well. And, we all we all like to pretend that we are just the victims in our stories, but
yes, I hear you loud and clear.
Yeah, so we have to be honest with that part too, and introspective, and look in the mirror and say, how much of this is, was self-inflicted,
Completely.
But yeah, doing what we're doing right now, being honest about it, talking about it. It's a theme that I've really been working hard on because, got 2 sons in the Marine Corps. Both of them have seen friends of theirs lose their life in combat. One of them has taken life in combat, and came home with a lot of mental health issues, like you said, and but I see in both of them, like they both were struggling with PTSD, and the one that had to take life in combat, it took him a couple years. But it's always with you. And I'm not saying he's completely whole, but man, he's so much healthier than he was 3 or 4 years ago. And my son, who witnessed his best friend commit suicide right in front of him, sitting as close as we're sitting to each other on the firing range in the Marine Corps, between that and having severe injuries to his body and force recon training, he went through huge depression, had to sit in the medical bay for 3 months just with his thoughts of his friend committing suicide and his body being wrecked. And so when he came home, 6-8 months ago, I hardly recognized him because he was just in such a dark place, but we, just kept working through it, kept talking through it, kept praying through it. And he was just here these last couple of weeks, and it was so good to see him just being his goofy, jokey, laughy self again. And so I guess, that's a great point for us to make here is, as dark as it might seem right now, hold on, persevere, get some help, get some friends, communicate, talk, because you might feel like there's nothing left and it's done. But it's not, I mean, there is hope. There can be joy in the future. There can be happiness in the future if you just keep persevering,
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you're committed and you look for it, you'll find it.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you for this conversation, man.
Thank you.
I would ask you, but what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pull all of your website and your socials, and I'll put it in the notes for the show.
Amazing. I promise anyone who follows me on Instagram I'll be making an effort to post more. I hear that's something I need to work on, so we're going to be working on it. It's an evolving effort. So